Good morning. Today I'm going to talk about moon symbolism and the Moonchild video track, which is in RM's solo album, Mono. And many of you have told me around the world that you've found that quite healing. And so I want to talk about the archetypal and alchemical symbolism of the moon. But first, I'm going to read a bit more from Dr. Stein's book. So I'm reading from Jung's Map of the Soul, an introduction by Mary Stein, and I did find out overnight that it is translated into Korean. So that's great. So my Korean followers can buy the book in Korean and follow along with me. So I'll be doing the following things. I'm going to read Dr. Stein's passages. Then I'm going to talk about moon symbolism and Moonchild. And that will help you understand why it is that RM's video of Moonchild is found so healing for everyone around the world. And let me just line up my video appearance. Anyway, to the extent I can make my appearance better. Anyway. This is from page 146 of Dr. Stein's work, and it's in a subtitle that includes the word relationships. And so for good reason, many people steer clear of the shoals of Animus experience. The native defenses of the ego hold this temptation at a distance. Little boys run away from little girls who are too powerful and attractive, knowing intuitively that they are not able to meet the challenge. Grown men are sometimes wise enough to do the same, for the Anima is a wrecker of conventional marriages and careers. Just think of our Vice President Pence, who steers clear of any other woman other than his wife. But most men are mature enough to interact with other women, so that's what you want to have happen. Women, too, will resist the call of the Dionysian Animus, drawing them toward ecstasy and promises of fulfillment by abandoning themselves to love. For here also lie the dangers of dismemberment and madness. It is not without reason that many have prayed to be delivered from temptations beyond their ability to remain standing. One of Jung's favorite illustrations of the power of the Anima was Rider Haggard's She, a second-rate novel that depicts an immortal femme fatale in the wilds of Africa whose commands must be obeyed. She who must be obeyed is not simply a humorous appellation from Rumpol's bossy wife. The phrase comes from Haggard's novel. She is an eternally dying and resurrecting goddess who leads men into the flames of passion and finally to their destruction. But Jung also felt that if one was able to endure the fires of emotion and passion, one could be transformed. The experience of the archetype, let me turn on my camera, my light. Neglected to turned on my light, so I'm sitting here in the dark. But Jung also felt that if one was able to endure the fires of emotion and passion, one could be transformed. The experience of the archetype of the collective unconscious and its power can lead to a new state of consciousness in which the reality of the psyche becomes as convincing to the ego as the reality of the material world is to the senses. The anima animus, once experienced as transcendent and recognized as Maya, becomes the bridge to a wholly new apprehension of the world. The Animus experience is the royal way, the via regia, to the self. Jung's anima-animus theory seems in part to be a highly imaginative variation on Freud's old theme of sexuality as the central source of libido. But in human sexuality, Jung sees a good deal more than animals rutting in heat and trying to relieve themselves of tension or to pursue pleasure. Psychic attractors are involved, and when these are distinguished from the accompanying biological activity, the image emerges. This image is a psychic fact whose source lies at the archetypal end of the psychic spectrum. It is wedded to the sexual instinct, and this combination gives the anima-animus its driving physical power. Human sexuality is guided by the archetypal image, but the image is not reducible to the drive. We are attracted to certain people. Why does one choose this person for a soulmate and not another? This is governed by the images that are projected. Typically, the animus likes to project itself upon intellectuals and all kinds of heroes, including tenors, artists, sporting celebrities, etc. The anima has a predilection for everything that is unconscious, dark, equivocal, and unrelated. For example, at a loose end in woman, and also for her vanity, frigidity, helplessness, and so forth. Why do such difficult women attract men so frequently and with such ease? Why is it that strong women often do not attract men? Jung suggests that this predilection for weak and helpless women is based on an anima projection, the anima being undifferentiated and inferior in the unconscious of a strongly male-identified person. Age-old wisdom tells women that to attract a man, be helpless. The anima represents the undeveloped side of a man where he is unconsciously helpless and at loose ends, dark and equivocal. He is attracted by that. Similarly, strong women will be attracted often to weak men, sometimes fatefully, and then become filled with fantasies of saving them from alcoholism or some other decrepitude. Again, they are seeking a lost part of themselves, the animus, who appears as an inferior male in projection. Or, if she is a weak and helpless woman, her unconscious may compensate with images of male competence, and she will find herself hopelessly attracted to a heroic animus projection carrier. Once persons get together and spend some time in each other's company, the ensuing relationship begins showing some other typical anima-animus characteristics. In an intimate relationship, it is not only the egos of the partners that enter into the mixture of psyches, it is also the unconscious parts, and importantly, the anima and animus. They have been there all along, supplying the attractors to both members of the couple, but now they may appear surprisingly different from what they looked like in the courtship stage of the relationship. Here is Jung, the psychological realist, describing the situation. Quote, "No man can converse with an animus for 5 minutes without becoming the victim of his own anima. Anyone who still had enough sense of humor to listen objectively to the ensuing dialogue would be staggered by the vast number of commonplaces, misapplied truisms, cliches from newspapers and novels, shop-soiled platitudes of every description, interspersed with vulgar abuse and brain-splitting lack of logic. It is a dialogue which, irrespective of its participants, is repeated millions and millions of times in all languages of the world and always remains essentially the same. On the male side, the anima becomes touchy, overly sensitive and emotional. On the female side, the animus becomes abusive, power-ridden, and opinionated. This is not a pretty picture and surely offers a stark contrast to the more romantic version of the Mysterium Conjunctionis, the mystical union of song and story. The one partner becomes possessed by the Animus, an undifferentiated collection of opinions motivated by a power drive, and the other retreats into a mood that is undifferentiated and driven by the need for love. One is dogmatic, the other withdrawn or emotional, and starts throwing things around. It is a typical Anima versus Animus cat and dog fight. If the emotionality and vituperation, the heat and fireworks of this conflict dies down a bit, there is a possibility that things will have been said that are important for the couple. Once the egos are restored to their normal positions, they may even realize that some transcendent event has taken place. What was said was probably not very personal. It was more general, collective, perhaps even archetypal and universal. Perhaps there is a germ of wisdom hidden in the dark mass of material that has erupted from each partner. Perhaps some clarifications and insights can result from the storm that has now passed. This would be the work of consciousness rising above the level of emotionality and arriving at insight and empathy. At the very least, one will have had a glimpse into the depths of oneself and of the other, into the emotional far reaches that are normally hidden behind the socialized and adapted persona. It would, of course, make sense to look at Jung's own life to amplify further the meaning of the Anima figure held for him. That is beyond the scope of this study. Like other Jungian analysts, Dr. Stein retreats from talking about Dr. Jung's actual life. I have used some passages from his autobiography, and biographical works are in print, and others are underway that give fuller depictions of his profound relationships with women. Jung once said that all psychological theory is also personal confession, and this is especially true of these areas that speak of the inner figures and personalities of the psyche, such as the shadow, the animus, and the self. These concepts and abstract theories were based on concrete psychological experiences, much of it interpersonal and not only solitary and private. With respect to the Anima, she was for Jung both a living inner reality, a true inner figure of the first rank, and she was also powerfully experienced by him in projection and in relationship. Beginning early in life with his nursemaid and extending through his romantic courtship and marriage to Emma Rauschenbach, and his deep and enduring relationship with Tony Wolff, the Anima was a constant companion in Jung's inner and outer life. To him, she seemed to be the guide of his fate and the most profound experience of the self, a concept which I will describe in the following chapter, occurring for Jung in the conjunction between man and woman, when the Anima and Animus were the guiding figures in their union. Okay, so that's what I wanted to read to you from Dr. Stein today. And now I'm going to go on to Moon Symbolism. But before I do, I want to just take a look at your chats. And Moonchild says, thank you for listening to the mixtape. Yeah, I was very interested in mono last night, and I see why so many BTS armies are very much healed by that album, and I liked it very much. And Carlos says, thank you for your wisdom. You're welcome. Myrtis, hello, everyone. Annika, hello. Amir, hello, good evening. It's 10 p.m. here in the Philippines. Hello to listeners. Amir and viewers. Jason Stone, so glad I caught this. Donut, hi, good morning, good morning. And Carlos says the passage is scary, accurate. Yeah, you think? And Moonchild says, I lost my focus for a second. Now I can't understand anything. Have to rewatch later. Yes, it takes multiple readings or rewatchings to get that. So in the English language version, I'll just tell you where it was. It's on page 146 to 149, and the type is sexuality and relationships. But here he's not talking about gender. Here he's talking about anima and animus, and they can be of different strengths in every human being. So we're not talking about gender here. And I really love the Mono album. It says Mochi. It's a healing music for me, and many people have found that. And I've got strength. Hello, sorry, I didn't understand. Did you listen to the whole mixtape? But now you'll go into the Moonchild song, or you just listened to Moonchild. I listened to the whole thing, but I was definitely focusing on last night on Moonchild, and Meritus was kind enough to give me a link this morning to remind me where it was, because it was about midnight last night when I was looking at it. And the reason I'm going to focus on it is because by synchronicity, this is the exact topic that the advanced reading group is covering this week in our advanced reading group. And I just want to pull up this tarot card for a moment, and I'll talk about that after a while. But anyway, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little about Mysterium Conjunctionis. And here, Dr. Stein has mentioned the phrase Mysterium Conjunctionis. And how does he put it? Let's see here. Well, I think he said something like the mysterious or mystical marriage or connection. And that is really the objective of all Jungian psychology, is to unite the opposites. It's a fool's errand because it never can succeed. But you can get closer to it and bring it into your life and understand it. And Jason says, it sounds like there is a complex relationship between parts of the soul. Certainly that's true. My mom bought, Annabelle says, my mom bought the book because of BTS, so I'm going to read it after her. You might want to steal it when she's not looking. Ina says, Everything Goes is the most comforting track for me in mono, but Moonchild is very close to my heart too. RM said Moonchild is a prequel to his other song, 4 O'Clock. He references Moonchild there too. And Carlos says, I've recently started exploring tarot based on your recommendation, and I drew that card upside down on my first draw, along with the sun upside down. Well, we call that reversed in tarot, and depending on the reader, it can either be meaningless, in other words, a reader just reads all the cards straight up, or it can mean the opposite of whatever the card is, which is reading it reversed. And I normally do read reversed, but I'm not going to do a reading for you now because my head wouldn't be in the game. and I've got strength. I like the cumulative effect of the whole playlist, just as RM meant it. So I'm glad that Skip listened to the whole thing. Daniela's hearts and smiles and Sunderbush albums like that are meant as a whole experience, definitely. And let me say that one of the big things that's happening here is a global fulfillment of need in the collective unconscious. I mean, we've had a period of 25 or 30 years, especially in the United States, but Korea is obviously, because of the political situation between the two Koreas, has also felt a lot of anxiety, and obviously there's a lot of military things going around the world, but especially involving the United States and Korea, and so in what I'm seeing manifest now through BTS is a deep need of the population to have some feminine energy. And so, first of all, I want to talk about this book. And if you're a beginner on Jung, this is not the book to begin with, I assure you. Okay, it's about 2 inches thick here. And we're currently studying it in our advanced reading group. If you wish to join the advanced reading group, you can send me email to skip.conover@gmail.com or at skip_Conover on Twitter or on Facebook. And in all those cases, anyway, the point is that what is Mysterium Conjunctionis about? It is the third book about alchemy that Dr. Jung wrote, and it's the last really major research book that he wrote. And even many Jungian analysts have not read it, and obviously they really must. But why was Dr. Jung so interested in alchemy? And the reason is because the medieval alchemists and before, the alchemy was practiced almost from the time of Christ, and it involved people that weren't in the church, and so they were being very mysterious about what they were doing. But what they were really doing was trying to understand themselves. They may not even have understood that themselves. I mean, what they were looking for was evidence of the spirit in matter. Okay, and they knew, for example, at that time that some irons produce magnetism. Okay, so they knew that there was a spirit between the two sides of the magnet, the North and the South Pole, and in one direction it would draw together, and the other way it would fly apart. And so that they knew there was a spirit there, and they knew that there was a spirit in certain kind of jellyfish who would latch on to ships, and those jellyfish would multiply on the ship and eventually sink the thing. And so they knew that something other than physical reality, what you could see, was happening. And so they kept experimenting with matter in order to try to understand the spirit of the matter. And so that was, and people often say alchemy was a precursor to modern chemistry, which it certainly was. But what it also was a very deep study into the human psyche. And they didn't have the science of psychology at that time, so they didn't really know that that's what they were doing, but that's what they were doing. And Dr. Jung, and so when an alchemist is talking about looking for gold, yeah, they could have been happy if they could make gold. And actually, that is possible. I've seen a documentary where some guy in the UK spent $14 million or something on enough heavy equipment to turn matter into gold. But he, for $14 million, he got like an ounce or two of gold. So it wasn't really worth the effort. But the gold that they were talking about was the gold of the self and understanding the deep unconscious and your wholeness in life, your psychological wholeness, which is a lot of what Dr. Jung's work was. And so one of the reasons that he was interested in it is because there were images. Let's see. Okay, there were images that came up from the alchemist, which were pure images. Okay, these were images that had no what he called epistemological criticism. So the point is, up until the year 1500 or so, there was no such thing as epistemological criticism. There was no criticism of whether your song was good or bad, or whether the alchemist was doing something good or bad. These images were simply coming up from the psyche. And Dr. Jung felt that they were the purest example of deep archetypal imagery in human beings. And because they were working very privately and secretly, nobody was saying, oh, you didn't get it right today. You got to do this or this or this. And that's what would happen today. And so an image coming up today, we all think in images. And so an image coming up today would be full of criticism, including BTS's work. But Jung said if we went back to 1500 and that era and the alchemical images, we would get a clearer picture of the images that are in the human psyche. And so we think in images all the time. And so I'll give you an example. This is actually my favorite alchemical image. And so in this image, you see that the dragons are in a glass flask, and that glass flask represents the container for the instincts. So those instincts are there in the glass flask, and around them is civilization built up. But nonetheless, all of us have instincts, and we all have an animal nature, and usually we can control it. And here that controlling is being represented by the dragons in the glass flask. And then across the top, you're seeing Apollo, the sun, going across the scene and so on. So that's an example of an archetypal image. And so what Mysterium Conjunctionis is going back and talking about the development in history of each archetypal image and how it was talked about. And so one of those topics was the moon. And so it so happens that in the advanced reading group, we've been talking about moon or Luna in the advanced reading group. And so I can read to you a couple of little parts. And this is talking in part about what Dr. Stein was talking about in his book about how little boys are sometimes afraid of little girls because they don't know how to deal with the feminine energy. And so it's often better for men who are older than women to marry them, especially if you're going to marry young. It's better that the male is older and more mature, because then he's able to integrate and include the feminine energy in his thinking. But immature boys still are not able to do that. And so anyway, I'm going to read to you. This is Dr. Edward Edinger's series of lectures on Mysterium Conjunctionis, called the Mysterium Lectures, a journey through C.G. Jung's Mysterium Conjunctionis. And Mysterium Conjunctionis means the mystery of the conjunction of the opposites. And let's see, before I do that, we seem to be having a few chats here, so let me go back and take a look. Let's see, Mochi says, BTS also always talked about dream in their songs and lyrics, and I wonder, do we need at least one dream in our life, and is it okay not to have any dreams? Well, it's okay to not have any dreams. Dr. Jung said late in his life that he was not having dreams, and that apparently was because he was so individuated. But in general terms, we do have dreams. You have thoughts. When you're thinking of something, you think of an image, even an image of RM singing Moonchild. And that's a kind of dream. So if I mention that song and that music video, you're going to have an image of that in your mind. And so that's an example of an image in your mind. And what dreams do is they try to tell you something. And, at the most base level, it would have been something like danger. And so for our great ape ancestors, for example, if a tiger came around, that was danger for our ancestors. And so what would happen to them is an image of a tiger would come into their mind before they necessarily realized it was there otherwise, before they sensed it consciously. And so the way that works for me today is that if I'm driving down the highway and suddenly I think about a police car, or I have a vision of a police car, I know my unconscious is trying to give me some message about police. And it could be this early instinctual function of danger put into a modern context. And so invariably, within a minute or two, if I'm driving, within a minute or two after I have that vision or that thought that just comes to mind, I definitely see police activity somewhere. So my psyche sees things before I consciously see them. Like when I'm going down the road at like 70 miles an hour and that's speeding, if I have that image, I immediately know there's going to be a speed trap. And so I immediately slow down. And so some people, at least in the old days, used to buy radar detectors, and before they were made illegal in a lot of states, where they'd put a device with radar, or that would see radar, which is a speed trap, and then it would give a warning. Well, I don't need that, because I do it instinctually. My unconscious does it instinctually. And so let's see. In Paradise, Annabelle says, in Paradise, Shuga says it's okay to not have a dream, or even little things can be called as dreams, like having a new book or gift for oneself, or just little things to make you happy. That's good, yeah. But in the end, material things don't make you happy. So if you strive to get a yacht or build a 45-story building or something like that, and then you succeed, it's great while it's going up because you have an activity and that's keeping you busy and you're making choices and so on, and that gives meaning to your life. But once it's built or once it's purchased, then it has no value for you anymore from a spiritual point of view. Centerbush, I used to dream more when I was younger, but daily routine and kids and getting less sleep lately, I can't honestly remember last time I could recall a dream. Well, if you start thinking about it, it will start again, probably. Alex, there is such solitude in that goal. The moon of these nights is not the moon the first Adam saw. Long centuries of human vigil have filled her with an old lament. See, she is your mirror. Okay, that's a worthy archetypal point. Mochi, after I met BTS, I think I started to get passionate to have such dreams and work hard for it. But after Shuga said it's okay not to have any dream and just be happy, I was confused for a while. Well, dreams offer you a compensation for whatever's happening in the physical world. And so, I would say, and I'm not a mental health professional either, so this is not definitive, but I would say that Shuga's comment is probably pretty superficial, and you shouldn't take that as advice from a professional psychologist. But Annabelle says, so it's all about symbolism. Yes, it's all about symbolism. I've got strengths. Sometime after Paradise, I finally figured what my dreams may be because they lifted the pressure of necessity of having a dream, and I almost never had a dream before that. Interesting. Mochi says, and then after Paradise released, I think I had rethink again and trying to lose myself a little bit. And when you're working with the archetypal layer, it's very common and normal to have dreams and visions start up. That's what happened to me. And so if you're thinking about these things, then they're going to start responding because you're going to wake them up. And Annabelle, could that indication of the moon is related to madness or some kind of power? Or, for example, the werewolf myth is about the moon turning one into a monster. Okay, and so, Annabelle, that is an important aspect of what we're talking about and what RM was pointing to in Moonchild. But let me read this 2 pages of Dr. Edinger's book, and I'm reading from the Mysterium Lectures by Edward Edinger. And so I'm just going to read 3 or 4 of his points about the moon and the symbolism of the moon, because Mysterium Conjunctionis is all about these images that came up during the medieval period before they were criticized. Okay. And so they're natural images that come up in the human psyche. And that was Dr. Jung's point. So, so point number 2 in this section, it's called "The Moon Promotes Fertility, Healing, and the Growth of Plants." In folklore, planters are advised to consider the phases of the moon. The full moon is best for planting above ground crops, and the dark moon is best for planting root crops. Medicines are supposed to have their best effect when they're taken at the full moon. Erich Neumann gives a very nice account of the psychological implications of this feature of moon symbolism in his essay on the moon and matriarchal consciousness. I want to read you some passages from it because Neumann catches the flavor so well. Quote, "The common identification of our ego with patriarchal head consciousness and the corresponding unrelatedness to matriarchal consciousness often leads to our not knowing what is really happening to us. We find out only later that we have been deeply impressed by things, situations, and people. The saying of Heraclitus holds true: nature loves to hide herself. The moment of conception is veiled and mysterious, often submitted to by the ego of matriarchal consciousness without any awareness on the part of the head ego. But a deeper introspection, taking dreams, images, and fantasies into account, will show that in the matriarchal consciousness, the moment and the event have been registered. There is much meaning in the veiling of these moments of conception, which are often so vitally important. Growth needs stillness and invisibility, not loudness and light. It is not under the burning rays of the sun, but in the cool reflected light of the moon, when the darkness of unconsciousness is at the full, that the creative process fulfills itself. The night, not the sky, is the time of procreation. It wants darkness and quiet, secrecy, muteness, and hiddenness. Therefore, the moon is Lord of life and growth in opposition to the lethal, devouring sun. The moist nighttime is the time of sleep, but also of healing and recovery. The moon god, Sin, is a physician. The realms of healing and healer, healing plant and recuperative growth, meet in this configuration. It is the generating power of the unconscious that in nocturnal darkness or by the light of the moon performs its task, a mysterium from out of itself. This is why healing pills and herbs are ascribed to the moon and their secrets guarded by women, or better, by womanliness, which belongs to the moon. Okay, that was the first point. Second point, the moon promotes coagulatio, which is a Latin term which means coagulation or pulling together, creating form. As is evident from the moon's position between the earth and the upper regions, all descending entities that are destined to incarnate, be born, to take on material form, earthly existence, have to pass through the moon in order to achieve incarnation. That's the symbolic reason why the Virgin Mary is equated with the moon. She served the function of the moon to bring about the incarnation of Christ. To expand on this a bit, it's expressing the psychological fact that any specific form, manifestation, or structure which solidifies our life energies into some particular concrete expression belongs to the nature of the feminine principle. So one of the features of the feminine is that it concretizes. That's another word for incarnating or coagulating. Any entity, it might be patriotism to a country, it might be service to a church, to a community or particular institution, to some particular cause, to a family, a vocation, an avocation, or to a personal relationship, any particular form that is capable of enlisting our commitment, of concretizing our life energy, pertains to the feminine principle. Even such apparent abstractions as science or wisdom or truth or beauty or liberty are examples of the coagulating power of Luna, if they actually have the power of organizing one's life energy in a concrete way and evoke a commitment from the individual. To say it another way, the power to evoke a commitment of libido is a form of relationship energy, and that ties in with the fact that Jung has defined the feminine principle as the principle of relatedness. Thus, we can say that relationship, in the broadest sense of the word, the capacity to relate, is a feature of coagulatio. It promotes coagulatio. So let me just observe that perhaps at the deep unconscious for BTS armies, who are apparently 80% women, perhaps the quote unquote son of the He-Man masculine hero principle is a bit too much, and it's gotten out, much too much in our collective unconscious. And so there has to be a compensation for that. And so when so many young women get interested in BTS, that can be partially because BTS is softening the masculine principle. And so it's not as bright a sun as if if a leader shows up with a bunch of goons, everybody goes and hides in the corner, right? But if an ambassador comes in or something like that and speaks calmly and quietly, that's easier to face the brightness of that sun. And so the fact that BTS presents as it does, it doesn't make them any less masculine, I don't think. I think they're simply saying at a very deep unconscious level that we hear what you need and we know what you need for healing. And that's what RM has done in this mono album. He's provided healing energy, which is feminine energy. And typically young women will relate to that and they say, oh boy, I would like to have a man that's more balanced and more balanced toward the feminine than this blazing sun of people that go around and think that they can grab everything in the world. And so I think that's part of the phenomenon we're seeing in BTS. In other words, unconsciously, women have been looking for men who are more moon-like and who aren't just out there flexing their muscles and so on, growing big beards and that sort of thing. So let me go back and look at your comments, then I'll get through a couple of more of these sections here. So should I read the part about madness? Not sure, because Annabelle was asking about madness. Oh, I know where it was, I think. Okay, I apologize. Annabelle, you asked about madness, and I skipped this page. And so I think I better read this page to you. This was the first point that Dr. Edinger made in this book. So this is called The Moon as Mediator and Gateway Between the Realms. First of all, there is a fundamental idea that the moon is the mediator, intercessor, and gateway between the realm of celestial influences and the earthly realm. I would remind you again of the geocentric image of the universe in which, according to antiquity, the moon was set. The planetary spheres are arranged concentrically around the Earth, and the moon sphere is closest to the Earth. Therefore, all influences, all transmission of material and effects between heaven and earth must pass through the moon. He's talking about in ancient times. That's the only way to get to earth from the upper regions. You have to go through the moon. In psychological terms, we can say that the feminine principle is the funnel or gateway between the personal and the transpersonal psyche. And what is communicated between these two realms can be positive or negative. Lunacy can be transmitted, for instance, or grace can be transmitted, usually symbolized by dew, which is thought to drip off the moon to the earth. In one of his seminars, Jung gives us a negative example of what is transmitted by the moon. It's a story about a man in bed in the middle of the night who saw moonlight streaming in. And of course, that's one of the symbolic images in Moonchild. He had the thought that he could crouch in the moonlight and bay like a dog and still wouldn't be mad because he knew what he was doing. But then he did it and he became mad. That story, you see, is a kind of parable of one aspect of moon functioning. And so what happens when you're relaxing, you're going to sleep and so on, is the instincts come up and have a role, a bigger role in what you're doing. And so, you know, if you take let's just say if you take your conscious mind and set it aside with meditation or something like that, it allows your instincts to interact with you more, and you might get a crazy idea about baying like a dog. And of course, Dr. Jung was used to dealing with people that were genuinely crazy because he worked in a mental hospital for 15 years. And so this is one of the reasons why we have to be more aware of mental health, because things can come up and then they can indicate some illness. So anyway, going on with this, a quite opposite kind of image came up in a remarkable dream. This was dreamt by a woman shortly after taking her husband to the hospital for an emergency abdominal operation. He had an acute abdominal crisis and had his gallbladder removed. Here is the dream. Quote, "She's standing in a circular room in the center of a building. The room is actually a disc-like platform that's equipped with life support systems, and it's attached to a center core so that the platform can be moved up and down in the building. Then it's been moved to the topmost floor. To her amazement, she sees that the roof has opened up, and we're in the midst of a huge galaxy of stars like the Milky Way. And even more amazing is that all the individuals and equipment on the disk are being recharged by the stars. And she's overwhelmed with the effects of this view. She looks around and nobody else seems to notice. They're all too busy. She's the only one that sees it. She tries to speak, but she's overwhelmed with the living, pulsating, blood-filled warmth of the vision. As she's waking, she's trying desperately to find a visual image to get a hold of what she experienced. What she sees is a huge udder, which is the Milky Way, and I think that it's nourishment for all of us. And so there's this image here of an udder coming down from the Milky Way, and it's about regeneration, of course, and gaining back your energy. There's no actual mention of the moon in this dream, but the huge udder takes its place. The celestial influences correspond to the planetary powers that communicate their effects down through the moon to the earth. This dream is an exact representation of the remark from an alchemical text that Jung quotes in paragraph 154 of Mysterium. The earth receives the powers of the stars, and in it the sun generates the gold. This woman had a vision of the archetypal forces assisting the whole hospital operation that was caring for her husband in his emergency situation. It's a beautiful example of how, at urgent times, the archetypal psyche can be activated in a helpful way, and also of those lines of Holderlin, which Jung is fond of quoting: where danger is, there arrives salvation also. So that's the werewolf and the dark side of the moon is in there. And obviously, the idea of vampires, for example, sucking out your blood. Obviously, there's no such thing as vampires, and in the physical world, but in the psyche, there are banks that are sucking your blood, and they're a kind of vampire, for example. And so, I was watching an interesting video today about the Boy in Love video. They were talking about the color psychology in the music video. And certainly color is a part of these archetypal images. Carlos, there is also daydreams, which often go overlooked, right? And so if you just set your mind aside, you can have an active imagination where certain complexes in your psyche can present themselves as beings, as human beings or whatever. That's what Dr. Jung's Red Book is about. And that's what happened in my novel. I was presented with images of people who were actually, in my imagination, physically there, and I was simply taking dictation from them for the writing of my novel. And Lena says, and it just jumped, and why the music video is so nice to look at. I do know the CEO of Big Hit has a degree in aesthetics. It could be why their video use variations in color, certainly. And Carlos says my police car vision is a good example of a daydream. Yeah, in a way, that is an involuntary daydream. That I characterize that more as a vision, but a daydream would be where you're intentionally setting your conscious mind aside and letting things roll. Whereas in the case of my police car vision, that's a vision. That's saying there's psychic energy here, right? The psychic energy says, pay attention now, okay? As opposed to most of the time, the images that are evolving from your unconscious are not noticed in the brightness of the day. When you're conscious of all the things around you in your life, you're not actually seeing these rather dim images that are coming up. But if an image comes up and it has psychic energy in it, then it's bang, you have to pay attention to this right now. And so, we have various examples from the Bible, for example, examples of Paul on the road to Damascus, of Job, his multiple visions of Yahweh, and the disciples of Christ seeing him present himself, for example, and going back all the way to Abraham, who's the father figure for Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And what is one of the most important things that Abraham did was he went on the mountain to sacrifice his son, and human sacrifice was a scourge of the ancient world, because people thought they had to sacrifice a daughter or something to God. And on the side of the mountain, Abraham had a vision that he could use a goat for the sacrifice instead of his son. And that certainly was a miracle, and it was a vision, and it was right now, because he had the knife ready to sacrifice his son, and this vision came to him, and then by synchronicity he saw the goat there too, and that gave him the insight that human beings should stop sacrificing their children. So those are all visions that are right now. And Annabelle says, I think those little things are to give an idea that dream can be a small things as long as it makes you happy. Doesn't necessarily be a material thing. Right. And Dr. Jung observed that many times dreams are compensation. So if you're pushing very hard on something during the day, what has to happen is that your psyche needs to reset, because the psychic energy goes back and forth between the opposites. And so if you're pushing, you've got all the psychic energy over on one side, and the compensation is that that's relaxed, but also it draws your attention to the other side, so that if you write it down, if you write down a dream, then the symbolism of it might say something to you, and the insight of the opposite thing might say something. And hello to Portugal, Annabella. It's quite an interesting view of the moon when we now know that it's sunlight that grows the plants. Right, but of course this comes from the alchemical times, so this was before the scientific method. Yen says, I started watching when everyone was talking about dreams and not to love dreams in life. But I think having dreams of goals is important, but people nowadays pressure themselves to have the grand dreams or plans and be considered successful. Well, certain those are more goals, I would say, and I think that we've been misled by society the last few centuries, maybe, but at least the last few decades, where we've been sold this idea that you've got to have this or you've got to have that. Gee, I have to have a Mercedes in my driveway. Well, a Mercedes and a bicycle, if the traffic is slow in your city, a Mercedes and a bicycle will both get you to the same place. And so, what is having the Mercedes about? If you're doing something in your home, having guests or whatever, your Mercedes is still sitting out in the driveway, and you're still paying for it, even though you're not using it. And so we need a reorientation in terms of our thinking, because our president has proven now that you can have goals to get something big and ostentatious and global and so on, and you can achieve all those goals, and then you find that your life is empty. And I don't think there's anyone that can argue with us that this is not a happy man. And so he's the poster child for hyper materialism, and it's object lesson. Let me read on here a bit more. Okay, so The next point Dr. Edinger was making is the moon promotes solutio. So first, the moon was promoting getting things together, but it also promotes solution or going into solution. But the moon also promotes solutio because its association with water, the sea, the tides, the sap of plants, and with dew. So in some circumstances, it can coagulate, and in some circumstances, it can dissolve. In some circumstances, it can concretize and bring into reality psychic potentials. And in some cases, it has the effect of dissolution. There are two sides to solutio. One side is when something hard is melted and made soft and gentle, and that's the aspect where grace and renewal is brought by the dew of the moon or by the water of the moon. But in other cases, the solutio aspect is negative and dangerous feature, and that's illustrated by the myth of Diana and Actaeon, which I'll get to in a moment. So the point is that, people in the East are very good about meditation, typically, and prayer. We use prayer in the same way. And if you just take a step back from life or sit in the light of the moon in your room, as RM is doing in that one scene in Moonchild, you see that it can be very healing. And I've had any number of people communicate with me, either here on the chat or in Twitter, that how healing this album of RM's is. Mono is the name of the album. And so if you just take a step back from always having a goal, and just relax and do things, then it can heal and it can help you to focus better the next time. Now I want to talk about this Moonchild and this issue of instinct. So now I'm reminding you of this image, which appears in Psychic Energy, which is written by Esther Harding. And this image was created, it's called Splendor Solus, in 1582. And what the image represents is having the instincts in the middle, bottled up in this glass jar, metaphorically, and society, normal society, going on around it. But those instincts are there in all those people. And so what happens when you have the moon is you can have an instinct come forward. And in the case of the man that was baying at the moon, he was allowing some not good thing, some psychosis to come forward in his psyche, and that caused him to lose his mental health. But at the same time, for most of us, let's say we go for a walk with our loved one in the moonlight, that's going to be a very healing moment, because it allows you to take a step back from, the intensity of the day and just focus on one another again. And so let me read about Actaeon here. The moon, cold-blooded animals, and the dog. Actaeon was a younger hunter out with his pack of dogs when by accident he came upon Diana, the moon, naked in her bath. To punish him for her embarrassment, she turned Actaeon into a stag who was then dismembered by his own dogs. In other words, he was subjected to dissolution. This myth is an example of the symbol complex of moon, water, bath, dissolution. Actaeon would represent the young ego that prematurely stumbles upon the full intensity of the archetypal lunar principle and cannot stand the effects of it. He undergoes dissolution from the impact of that encounter. He's fragmented and dismembered by the dogs, who could say that one could say that he falls into an identification with the instinctual factors the dogs represent. Dog, water, and moon are all symbolically synonymous. We're going to be talking extensively. Well, that's something else. So then he goes on to talk about the moon card in the tarot. And so here you see the moon, and here these towers represent society that has a gate through which the moon can come through, and you see drops of moon energy coming down to the earth. But the dogs and the lobster in this particular card represent the instincts that can come forward and get attracted into this moon energy, and then you can be in trouble. And so the ideal again then is to have the instincts under control, then society can go on and live. But if the glass container is too controlling, so that you can't experience the instincts, then the glass is going to break and society breaks down. So you see, well, you could imagine, suppose that BTS, it happens that RM and Halsey are about the same age. So they're well matched at this point when they're nearly 25 years old. But imagine if RM had come upon a sort of like a late teenage Halsey naked when he was 13. Well, he wouldn't be able to even interact with that experience. And, it's said that a man cannot face a naked woman. Okay. And, it's very true that, if you come upon a naked woman, you may want to turn away because the feminine energy is too powerful in that consequence, or in that situation. And so then you have to, young men have to develop the maturity before that they can face this feminine energy that is represented by a woman or a girl, for that matter. Let's see. Animus says, it sounds pretty much like yin and yang to me. Yes, it is. And keep in mind that when you see the yin and yang symbol, the circle with the dark and the light side, there's a little bit of the other color in each of the two areas. And that image is moving. It should be thought of as a wheel that's moving. It's not stationary. And so if something starts to happen, if you accidentally walked into Halsey's dressing room and you were too young for it, you turn right around, but then that would get the yin yang moving. And so I've got strength says, looking at the moon is very calming. Just a couple of days ago, I was outside at night looking at it, and it's such a nice feeling. Yes, indeed. And Annabelle says, welcome to a psychology class. Yes, this channel is nothing but a psychology class on Jungian psychology. That's the way it's intended. So I hope you'll stick with it. And Mochi says, this is my first psychology class. Well, it's good to start understanding where you can benefit from learning about psychology, and that's to BTS's great credit that they're pointing out that this is important. And now BTS armies around the world are teaching one another. And I'm simply trying to provide some other material to work with and some reference points. Senator Bush says, Moon draws you in. It almost seems like an intimate encounter when you stare up at it. And certainly if you're with a partner, it also tends to draw you together, it seems to me. And Annabelle says, maybe that explanation of Moon is why many artists prefer to work overnight. Yes, because, when you're working late at night, it allows your unconscious to get out and teach you the things it needs to teach you. And all good art comes from the self. It doesn't come from the ego. And Maki says, the moon also seems to reflect every human being's sense of solitude. So we look at the moon and it's us in a sense. We connect with that inner part of ourselves. I'm just musing here. And that was Dr. Jung's point in talking about Luna in his book, Mysterium Conjunctionis, the fact that Luna came up, and here you can see, I think, it says Luna, the significance of the moon. And so he's got several pages of very detailed information about how moon imagery came up in the human psyche over thousands of years, because he's pointing back to all examples of it. And the reason he had to go back to the alchemical pictures is because he wanted images that had come up naturally within human beings before there was criticism by science or whatever. Okay, so now the astronomers can tell us that the moon orbits the Earth and all that stuff, and that it's not a star, for example. But ancients didn't know that, and so they had a different perspective on what these things meant. And so he was interested in what comes up in every human psyche before it's changed and molded by society, so that he could understand what's going on with the psyche, because the psyche is presenting certain images to convey a story. Your psyche tells you a story in a dream by presenting you with images, and it's for you to work out what the psyche is telling you, because the psyche learned to communicate with your conscious mind long before there was verbal communication, and long before there was writing and so on, although it can present you with writing now, like the writing on the wall in the Bible. But originally it was for things like, here's an image of a tiger, and from experience this means danger, and there might be a tiger around, or an image of a snake might mean there's a snake around. And so these symbolic images were coming up in the evolution of the human psyche over millions of years, and so the psyche is still communicating with us in that way. And we can't go back and change the archetypes and say, no, now you have to do it in writing. It doesn't work that way. Our natural way of communicating with our psyche is through images. So let's see. Senator Bush says, I've always preferred night, never knew why, but this is helping me understand more. Carlos says, Mercedes or bicycle. I prefer motorcycles. Well, they all work, but they still use oil, and they leave oil patches, and they sit in your driveway most of the time when you're not using them. And when that's happening, they're not much use. They're only an expense. And MB Bull says, I think you're missing the point, man. I don't know who you're referring to. So, and Maki says, I prefer the night, the rain too. And rain is another symbol that I'll get to on another day. Carlos, our super mature-ish. Oh, I can't tune in right now, but I'll make sure I do when the video is uploaded later. I might make a thread summarizing it on Twitter. That'd be great. MB Bull channel, where did you buy your deck from? Oh, I think I got this deck. When I gave the class to my group, and so you can be trained in the tarot by going to my tarot playlist. I did 18 videos on the tarot. When I did that, I bought a deck for every one of my class, and because the Rider-Waite deck is the most standard basic deck, I got everybody the Rider-Waite, but I have many other tarot decks. Just to give you an example, here's one, which is the Wild Unknown tarot deck. And so it's very fun to look at the tarot, because it's all about archetypal images, in fact. So Marissa says their debut song, No More Dream, talks about that. It's about society's, their own families' pressure on children to fulfill dreams that they are not even theirs. Yeah, that's a problem. Now, I'm going to excuse myself for a moment, and I'm going to turn off my sound, but you may continue on the chat. I'll be right back. Okay, that's all about how our instincts sometimes tell us, you better take care of this right now. And sometimes that's good, and sometimes it's bad. If a young man sees a woman that's not very, is scantily dressed, it may light off an instinct, and he may not be mature enough, and so he doesn't understand that attacking that young woman is not acceptable in civilization, and his instinct gets the best of him. And so that can say a lot about individuals and how they've been raised and so on. So to the Korean person who says, that you can't do English well. The best thing I can think of is to get on your iPhone English as a second language from Pimsleur, and that I've learned several languages, several of them really badly, but the best, I spent a year in Professional Defense Language Institute in the United States studying Chinese, but it was a very painful process. And when I studied both Arabic and Spanish with Pimsleur, in 3 months, I could be as good as my professional Chinese course that took a year. And so it's a very simple technique. You do it a half hour a day, and you simply listen and repeat the words. And within a month, you're speaking basic good language, and within 3 months, you're pretty well able to handle a conversation. So I urge any of you that are struggling with a language to look for the Pimsleur approach to it. Obviously, there are other approaches as well, Rosetta Stone and so on, but I've been very successful with Pimsleur. And French, for example, I studied for 5.5 years, and I'm hopeless with French. So, but that was in the old school, learn the vocabulary type thing and learn the grammar. And Pimsleur teaches you as a baby learns to speak its own language, and that's an excellent approach. So let's see. Korean subtitles are certainly possible. I've set this YouTube channel so you're able to add subtitles in any language you wish. And if you're able to, I would very much appreciate it. I do not have the money to pay for translation, so I can only encourage you, if you want to do it as a gift to society, to translate, please do. But anyway, this book, I do know now that this book is available, and it's especially available from the BTS store in Korean. So you can get this book in Korean. And I've been using Jung's Map of the Soul and Introduction by Mary Stein as the basis of these lessons, because BTS used this book as the basis of its new album, Map of the Soul Persona. And so, yes, does Rider-Waite deck come with a book like the one you showed a little while back? No, but let's see if I can reach my book. Okay, here's an excellent book on reading the tarot. It's called 78 Degrees of Wisdom by Rachel Pollack. And as you see here, it's based on the Rider-Waite cards. So it's an excellent place to learn the tarot. But the best place to learn the tarot is by going to the videos that I've created about the tarot on this YouTube channel. And there's a link to that playlist on the homepage of the channel. So if you're interested in that, I did 18 videos training the tarot, and if you watch those videos, you can definitely get a good leg up. And when you buy the Rider-Waite, you get a little book. Yeah, you do get a little book of basic meanings. So here's my deck, and I'll show you the little book, but okay, so here's the little book of meanings that you get with the Rider-Waite. And the point is, what's the basic point of tarot, and why do I think it's important or useful? it's useful to analyze yourself, because what happens, it's not a question of having to be at a party with a bunch of girlfriends or something and everybody does a reading. It's, you can do the tarot for yourself. And what it does is it causes you to think about things that you hadn't been thinking about. And it would be different for every person. So I've often made the boast, you probably heard it, that I could walk into an auditorium with 1,000 people, throw the cards across the stage, and then simply read them off the stage, and everybody would think that I did a reading for them. And the point is that everyone would hear a different reading. And the reason is because whatever word I say is going to make a different connection in your psyche. And so if I talk about the Empress card, for example, the Empress represents mother, and everybody's got a mother. So if I start talking about mother, everybody's going to connect up with that in the psyche. And so it's like a conversation where somebody says something and that takes you off on a tangent in your psyche where you start thinking about something else. There's a hook to that particular thing, and then somebody else goes off on another tangent, and your conversation gets way far away from where you started. And what the tarot does is it makes you do it if you do a formal layout, it makes you do it in terms of past, present, and future, and what does this reading mean, and that sort of thing. And a skilled reader can say things, and you can't talk back, but in your psyche, you're connecting with things that they're saying, and it makes you think of other things. And I have no idea what it connects up with in your mind, but it gets you thinking about things, and they're probably things that you're waiting to consider, but you've put them off. And so then in that conversation, they come up, and you start to work on them. And so it's it was typically done among women, and it's a kind of psychotherapy. It's a way of loosening. I call it moving around the furniture. It's a way to, loosen up your psychic stasis and make you think about new ways of looking at things. Discipline Master says, who is RM and BTS? Well, RM is the leader of BTS. It's the stage name of Kim Namjoon, who is the leader of BTS, and BTS is a boy band from Korea, which is just taking over the world by storm. They have 80 million fans, or probably many more by now. I haven't looked at the latest number that happened in the last week, but they're going to fill up the Rose Bowl and M&T Bank Stadium, I think, and four stadiums in the U.S. are going to be filled up with them. So it's comparable to when the Beatles came and filled up Shea Stadium before anybody knew what the Beatles were. That's what it is. And Castillo says, we are called Army, and Army stands something like adorable representatives with a microphone for youth, is what the acronym stands for, or an MC for youth. And I've seen different versions of that. And so I think I've covered that now. And so And so the significance of this is that they've just released an album called Map of the Soul Persona that's based on Dr. Jung's theories, and specifically on that book, Jung's Map of the Soul, an introduction. So, yes, the English text in Korean is too difficult, but there is I did see that on the BTS shop in Korea, there is a Korean language version of the book. Meredith says, we should remember that they are also telling a fictional story with fictional characters, so sometimes the lyrics and videos hint about the character's development. And Centerbush says, I bought the Golden Tarot deck by Kate Black. It has images from the Renaissance and the Middle Ages. It really spoke to me, and yay, I found my deck. I will be watching your vids on the tarot. Thank you. You'll enjoy those, I think. I hope I did a good job. I think a good enough job so that you can do the rest on your own. With, you know, if you get this book and watch my videos, you will be an ace tarot reader. Most of all, I love Summer Dawn. Birds wake up, but people are still asleep. And there are both the moon and the song in the sky. I don't remember writing much at night. Night is for brooding in my case. Yep, different strokes for different folks. And why BTS gets inspired by philosophy, reading materials such as Damon and other art. They are currently a very popular band. They broke into the US in 2017 and have been getting a lot of attention lately. Yes, definitely. And they're nominated for 2 Billboard Awards for the Billboard Awards show on May 1st. I've been wondering why some people are more inclined to the day and others are to the night. And, you know, you can think about how you yourself feel during the day versus at a time when you're recharging at night. Even if you're sitting around watching television, that's a kind of recharging. And right, the BTS performed on SNL last Saturday night, and it's a very interesting what happened there, but we've talked about that on previous days, so I'm not going to get into that now. I like the night, but night is just not very good for me. It's good only occasionally. I'm tired and more inclined to be sad at night. Yeah, I mean, you're letting down your persona, so you could, you know, stuff does come through that you weren't thinking about before. Greetings from Mexico. Hearing his analysis of the lyrics, BTS makes fine details that I skip for my lack of knowledge. Thanks for rediscovering them. Can I say how proud I am? Yes, definitely. They also sold out Wembley Stadium twice. Yes, I understand that they are. I don't know what the schedule is, but if anyone knows the schedule, wants to send it to me on Twitter, that would be terrific. And Love Yourself says, adorable representative MCs for youth. And so that's what Army stands for. I mean, obviously, it's metaphorically a huge group of fans, too, because that it certainly is an army. I'm very proud this sir knows so much about BTS and Army, but I'm sorry I don't. And Korean person says, I can't English well, so I can't understand what you said. I'm sorry about that. And so I would urge you to find some Korean friends who are good in English to start creating Korean closed captioning for some of these videos, that would be very helpful, and many people would benefit. And you don't know yet who's the writer of the book. Okay, the writer of the book. This book is Dr. Mary Stein. And Dr. Stein is one of the leading Jungian analysts in the world. MB Bull says, or you said you did MC. I'm a kind of master of ceremonies for Dr. Jung mainly, but what I see is that BTS is getting his ideas around the world, and so I am using this opportunity. I'm riding the wave of the interest in BTS to help people get connected with Jung's work, which I've been working with for a decade. But like BTS, I have done it in the dark largely until someone notices. MB Bull says, I bought the Oracle Tarot deck by John Holland. What's your thoughts on that deck? It came from a book and works quite well for me, but still learning. I'm really new at reading tarot. I don't know anything about that deck. I've heard of it, but that's all I know. But I mean, tarot decks are tarot decks, so they normally cover the same topics. And greetings from Malaysia. It's almost midnight here. Thank you so much for your words and explanation. Really love to hear your words again soon. Great. I think this is the 23rd presentation I've made for BTS Armies, especially. Obviously I'm interested in others that are interested in Jungian psychology, but I'm sure they're coming on this site right now and saying, whoa, what's BTS about? And did I catch the Dionysus performance? Yes, I did. And I do intend to do a discussion about Dionysus and the performance another day. And they said today BTS performed at the Music Bank. I don't know what that is, but sir, do you have a plan of attending one of their concerts? What I heard was that I could only get tickets for $2,200 a piece, and I don't have that kind of money, so I won't be attending a concert, or at least not soon. Much to my regret, I would love to do it. And Meredith says, RM said he wrote Moonchild about people who find more comfort and inspiration at night, like himself, even if now he doesn't put so much weight on the night. He feels like the night sets him free. And, obviously when you launch yourself on a several month-long concert tour, it's very hard to get back to your creative self, I would imagine. So I'm sure he likes that time, because being the center of attention of tens of thousands of people and have everything riding on you or those 7 men must be incredibly hard. And so you do have to go back and recharge, because you're expending your psychic energy out into the crowd, and they're recharging off of one another, and yours is going out into the crowd. But if you're doing that 2 or 3 times a week, that is very challenging, I would think. And so Meredith says he has a Vive video where he talks about each track on mono. I'll have to find that. And if you have a link, you can send it to me. Thank you. Love Yourself says, sir, what is your name and profession, if I may ask? You may ask. My name is Skip Conover, and it's in all the descriptions of all the videos, perhaps except this one. I normally have to add it after I've done the live stream, but I'm 72 years old, so I'm pretty much retired from my business career. And I'm an attorney. I've been an attorney since 1975. I served 23 years in the U.S. Marine Corps to the rank of lieutenant colonel. I have been a college professor and taught finance in the graduate school level and business law in the undergraduate level. I founded a company that became public, and I've flown around the world 75 times in my career, believe it or not. And so most of the countries mentioned here I have visited, with the exception of South America. I've never been to South America. As far south as I've been in North and South America is Costa Rica. But I hope to go sometime. And I've spent 8 years in Japan, and I've been to India 44 times since 1994, and to Saudi Arabia 23 times since 2002. So I've been around, and so that answers that question. River Song says, I want to thank you for taking the time to analyze BTS lyrics. I know you probably don't like the music. It's totally acceptable, but this lyrics are so profound, and it's nice seeing you sort of doing it. Please don't project on me that I don't like the music. I actually love the music. I think it's very good. And, very honestly, I don't mind that they sing in Korean, because I've never understood a rock song for the last 40 years. Ever since we moved away from folk singing, I haven't been able to understand all the lyrics in any song I heard, English or any other language. And so, it's only by working afterward to understand what the words are that you learn something. But the fact that we can't understand it in Korean shouldn't hold us back, because, heck, who can hear the words in any song the first time you hear it, in terms of what today's popular music is, for example. Someone said they hoped RM meets me sometime. Well, maybe he will. That would be terrific. And Ochidema MSC says, thank you for being an intermediary. Your insight is enlightening. Miles, awesome people here learning English. You are a good place for learning. This is also a place to learn to build bridges to all people on Mother Earth. Absolutely. And it's great. We have 61 simultaneous users right now. So that's a terrific turnout for a conversation about psychology. And, my view is, if one person hears something I say, that somehow that information will pass out to 10 more people. And it goes out through the society in ripples. So I don't mind if there's one person, because I think that by talking to one person, I'm actually talking to 10. It doesn't matter if you don't mention me. If I give you an idea that you then pass on to somebody else, I've had an influence, and I'm happy for that. So I'll be adding you on Twitter. I'll send it to you. Great. I'll look forward to that. Emeritus says, Viva is an app, Skip. There you can follow BTS and see their lives and some more contents a few hours after the live. The English subtitles are available. Great. I'll look for that. And it's V Live. Okay, VLIVE. Love yourself. Well, sir, thank you for sharing these information about yourself. I just wondered how you ended up involved with Jungian psychology. Well, I've told that story a few times, so I'm going to decline to tell it in this video, but you can find that story many places. And I came to it through the Myers-Briggs type indicator originally. And then, let's see. My desk is getting stacked with books. Okay, well, I don't, oh, here we are. Okay, then I was in a bookstore in 1990, and I found this book, Man and His Symbols, by Carl G. Jung. And I opened the introduction and saw that it was a book that he had written for the layman. So I decided to buy it to learn more about him. And I read it to my wife before we went to bed for about 3 or 4 pages every night for a year. And after that year, I felt like I had a year of psychotherapy. And so I was then hooked on Jung, and gradually I read more and more. I had a mistaken opinion that his own writing, things like this book, Mysterium, I thought this was all about clinical psychology, and I wasn't interested in clinical psychology, so I didn't. Originally, I read the books by people around Dr. Jung rather than Dr. Jung's own work. And, but then, I don't know, something motivated me to start reading his work directly. And I realized that he really was talking to us like I'm talking to you. And he had a lot to say about religion. And, you know, that's very important information. And let's see. This interview with Dr. Edward Edinger describes the significance of what he had to say about religion. Well, let's see, I have to make it smaller. Let's see, hope that'll work. No. Okay, I picked up too much for a 200 character thing. Let me start again here. Okay, so this is Edinger's summary on Jungian psychology about religions, and this is the link. And the link that's on that, what I just gave you was a transcript of an interview with Dr. Edinger. And unfortunately, the link is broken on that transcript, but that last link is a link to part of that transcript, so you can find it there. Atheris says, hi, I'm joining the live a bit late, but I just woke up. Find an article published on BBC today talking specifically about BTS's profound involvement of Jungian psychology within their new album. Yes, that's why I'm making a special effort to help BTS Armies understand Jungian psychology. Have you perhaps read it? I did read that interview, yes. And I don't have, well, let's see. I did actually put out on Twitter a take. One of the things that they said in that interview was that they just kept trying. They tried over and over again. And that's a very fundamental idea in Jungian psychology, which is how are you going to have an authentic life? Okay, so you have an authentic life and you defeat nihilism by getting off the sofa and going out and trying to do anything. It doesn't matter what it is. And you either succeed or fail. If you succeed, keep going. If you fail, and Jungian analysts are only interested in your defeats, not in your successes. So if you are defeated, then the idea is that you lament about that and then decide what you're going to do next. And that's rebirth. And that's called the Job archetype, which is contest, defeat, lamentation, rebirth. And you need to go through that cycle many times in your lifetime. And you have to make mistakes. And so the television program, The Voice, is an excellent, excellent example of that because they give everybody the chance to become a famous singer. And most people don't, and most of us can't. I mean, I don't know who among us could think that we could be part of BTS, for example, because their style is so unique. And so most of us can't, but what The Voice does is it gives you the chance to contest, to try, and then most people fail. So that's the defeat. Then people go back and lament, and the ones that are intended to be successful in music will go on and will learn from the problems that they had on their first appearance. And so sometimes you see people coming back in a second season to try again. But then most people don't. And so they take their electric guitar and they put it in the garage. And so probably half the garages in America have a electric guitar that isn't used anymore. But, those of you who are guided by yourself to be in music, as they clearly have been guided by that, you'll get better the next time you do it. And that's the point. And so I have a rule. When I was employing people, I would always ask, what's the biggest mistake you ever made? And people go, oh my God, how can I answer that? Well, my point is, if they tell me it's a little mistake, then they're either lying to me, one, which isn't good, or they haven't had any experience. But if they talk about a big mistake that they made and what they learned from it, then this is a person who's got a stronger ego. And that cycle of contest, defeat, lamentation, rebirth is how you build a strong ego so that you can face life, because life is difficult. We're solving problems every day, all the time. I mean, I had to leave this video for a minute because I had an issue that I had to deal with. and so we're solving problems all the time. And, we suffer from many of those problems all the time, in big quantities or little quantities. And so the stronger your ego is, the better you're going to be able to face the slings and arrows of life. And so that was one of the messages that they raised in that BBC interview this morning. And it was quite good because it's exactly the point. Miles says, Man in His Symbols has niche holes on 2 copies. Jung is really taking off. Yep, definitely. Actually, the hardbound version of this has been out of print for many years, But I think it may get reissued now because there is going to be more demand for it, and you can buy the book on used books on Amazon. And a couple of years ago, I was able to buy 3 for $10 in the used book section, and I gave them to people that I care about. Okay. I haven't seen all the comments yet, and what is my username on Twitter? Okay, my username is @skip_Conover on Twitter. And it will bring you back to this. If you look at my profile on Twitter, it will bring you to this YouTube channel. It's like Pluton, the regeneration planet. I hope so. I mean, I hope that I'm helping people to regenerate here. That's why I'm doing this. And Grenade says, JBP, that's Jordan Peterson, helped make Jung more popular for a younger mob. Yes, he certainly did. And, sadly, I received a comment from a Jungian. So without identifying who that comment came from, I won't say that. But she said, Skip, I so admire your leadership in critiquing Peterson's shallow and one-sided approach to Jung's comments. As a woman, I'd never take the risk of exposing myself to his creepy fans. Another large contrast to BTS. It's downright dangerous, so I just don't belong to the online Jungian community. But I do admire you for that, and I won't say who that came from, but that was a very positive reinforcement for me because although, mostly I don't disagree with Jordan Peterson, and yesterday I had to drive for about 2 hours, so I listened to a bunch of interviews with Jordan Peterson, and there was nothing in there that I really disagreed with, but Dr. Peterson, as a university professor in psychology, has to deal with many psychologies, so he doesn't have time to get into the detail of Jungian psychology in his classes and his work generally. And I tried to get an adjunct position at a local university teaching this material, and no one would even talk to me about it. So I decided, well, there's more than one way to skin a cat. And so, as BTS has proven, if you believe in something and you want to do something, you can find a way to do it. And so I've created my University of Jungian Studies here on this YouTube channel. And I've been doing it on the website since 2010. And I'll just point you to my website too. It's called archetypeinaction.com. And there you can find a lot of articles, essays about Jungian psychology, including a couple hundred by me. Let's see. And so Bernard says, I don't understand why people would hate Jordan Peterson. I think that it's not a question of hating him. I think it's a question of, for whatever reason, he's attracted many right-wing people, political people. And I think the issue is that he attracts that group, and that group is not very nice to women often. And but Dr. Peterson himself, he says himself that he tends to be on the liberal side of the political spectrum, and he doesn't agree with the extremes on either side, because he studied so much about the horrors of communism on one side, communism and socialism, and the horrors of fascism on the other side. The right is fascism, the communism is the left. And we have to, Dr. Jung was very emphatic that we have to get away from the isms. He called them the wretched isms, because the problem is when you have an ism, people don't think for themselves. They say, oh, well, that's socialism. Well, we have socialism that's very good and important everywhere in the world. We have police, that's a socialized function. We have fire department, that's a socialized function. We have a military, that's a socialized function. We have public education, that's a socialized function. So all of them are socialized functions. And so, the resistance that we get to socialism in the United States, I think mainly comes from the healthcare insurance industry, which is quite large. It has 1,500 companies in it. And so when you hear a political candidate say that we're going to have one type of health insurance for all Americans, that means those companies, or 1,500 companies, would go out of business, and all their employees would lose their jobs. And so that's not a good thing, and we have to think through what we need to do. But it's obvious also that we don't have a very functional healthcare system yet, and it's obviously a huge political football. And but we also don't have good competition. So the big insurance companies, the biggest ones, have divided up the country by state, and that allows them to treat those states as a monopoly, and therefore they can charge higher prices and so on. So there's no competition to keep costs down in the healthcare industry in the United States, which is why it's become so expensive. And so if we, what we've got is socialism for the healthcare companies, where they've allowed each big company to go in. And so like in California, it's Kaiser Permanente and maybe one or two others. And in my state, it's United, I think, and there are a few others. And so we somehow have to have new competition. And so, but we have to understand that the isms are not good. And Jordan Peterson understands that, but for him to get into it, then he gets himself in a political conversation, and then he's no longer a professor of psychology. So we can't take everything, we can't say that, Jordan Peterson is the end all be all of all thinking. I think he does provide a father figure for many young men, and keeping in mind that we have a 50% divorce rate in the United States and in many other countries around the world. And what that typically means is that 50% of all men grow up in a family without a father figure. So without a figure that can teach them how to be a man in society. And so to the extent that Jordan Peterson is serving that function for young men, I think he's providing a great service. And, as I said, mostly I agree with him. I don't agree with him on his overemphasis on hierarchy and logos. Hierarchy and logos are important in some respects. I mean, you can't have an iPhone or an automobile without having logos because and hierarchy and precision because they all have to be perfect all the time. And that's what logos brings you. But you can't have a church like Notre Dame without eros or life or the other side of it. And so, for example, okay, this cheery book, this is just a pile of words, okay, and it's just words on paper, and there's nothing magic about this, okay, and so the logos, it's full of words, but unless you put those words into your life and give it meaning, it's meaningless. So you might as well use it as a doorstop. So you have to have the other side of life also. So the symbolism of Notre Dame the last week is a perfect one because Notre Dame was built up over 800 years, and all that building was logos to the extent it wasn't creativity and artistic work. But the structure itself was all based on logos and the best logos of the time. So there were men in the 13th century that could bend those timbers to make the roof of Notre Dame. We don't even have those skills anymore. And that was all logos to build that. Okay, that's what the architecture is. But you might as well use it as a cowshed unless you put the Catholic faith into it and put life into it. And so that's what we have to remember, that yes, you have to have logos to build a Mercedes-Benz, but that Mercedes-Benz is going to sit out in the parking lot and not do anything unless you put life into it. And that's what we have to understand. And so men who've been sold on this all logos all the time haven't understood that. And what BTS has done is presented the eros side of life. Okay, there's nothing logos in what they're doing per se. They're talking to the psyche, and which is why they have 80 million fans around the world. And if you asked any songwriter, including a couple that we have following us here and who are my friends, they would never have put together music like BTS did until BTS did it. And now we can see that this is a way to educate people. It's a way to get people to pay attention to psychology. That's huge. That's huge. And so very powerful. And so Maki says, is this JBP from U of T? Yes, it's Professor Jordan B. Peterson of the University of Toronto. So Jordan, if you're listening to this, I'm 99.5% with you on almost everything, including the need for logos, but it's totally unbalanced, and we need to find a way to balance things. And Grenade says, he's Canadian, though. Yeah, he's Canadian, so what? Yes, he is conservative. I've heard him speak on the news. Well, okay, I heard him talking about himself, and he doesn't consider himself conservative. And that was just yesterday. So Grenade says, communism and fascism are two sides of the same coin. Yeah, and we're the coin in between, because they're two extremes in terms of perspective. One is an authoritarian government, and one which is vertical, and the other is an equality of outcome form of government, which is horizontal. and but we need wholeness, and we need to have a middle ground. Maki says, I'm Canadian, so I've had a chance to hear him. We can all hear him. He's on all over YouTube, that's for sure. Granad says, I'm moderate conservative, but I don't hate women or anything like that. And you can be sure that Jordan Peterson doesn't hate women. And I've never heard him say anything that suggests that he hates women. But there are some of his followers that do. And Celestial Scripture says, education and military are disastrous. Well, I don't know what you mean by that, because that's sort of a summary comment that without a context, it doesn't get through to me. And Merchant says, well, I'll stand with feminism. Okay. Women have to assert themselves more. And to the extent feminism allows them to do that, I think that that's useful. And we need to harness all the capabilities of all the people in the world all the time. And so if you have a place like Saudi Arabia that completely pushes women out of their society, or not completely, but let's say 90-10, because there are women in the healthcare industry, for example, you're losing half of your brain power of your country, and that's not good. And so to the extent that feminism is giving women the courage to come forth and ask for their part of the pie, I think that that's great, and they should do. I used to be a libertarian, and apparently a lot of INTJs are libertarians, but then I realized the necessity of central authority, even if I may not agree with it at times. Well, yeah, I mean, if we don't have central authority, then we have the Game of Thrones. And so we have to find the balance in everything we do in our lives and in our societies. And Love Yourself says, but what does it mean to be a man? I don't know. It means this. I feel manly. However, I do have feminine instincts sometimes. Certainly offering this course may be one of those as an example. But, it's not so easy to just say this is man and this is woman and never the twain will meet. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't. And so, I mean, what it means to be a man is to first get yourself educated so that you can assume a role in society, and then assume the role that is appropriate to you and your education in society, and take up your burden. We all have to take up your burden, and this is exactly what Jordan Peterson said, exactly the same thing. And the same for women. Some women are not happy about their gender and the fact that they're responsible for reproducing the species. And, we've all won the lottery, okay, one way or another. Even from our own fathers, we're one in millions, okay, of sperm that your father produced, and one of hundreds of eggs that your mother produced, and they came together, and that's an act of chance. So you're one in a million just in your own generation. And if you go all the way back, we're all descended from single-celled organisms, and ever since sex was invented, which was about then, till now, we're all the children of mothers who have produced successfully, who have reproduced successfully. And in every generation, the majority, most women do reproduce, and that's a role in society. Okay. And we can't change that. That's a given. And so, given that we're either a male or a female, then we have to assume a role in society. And it doesn't say that a woman can't be president, not at all. It says that, it says that our whole society relies on women. and so we can't make everything logos. There's other parts of life that we need. And so, Love Yourself says, how is it that different from being a woman or a human being? We all have our brains, and they all work more or less the same way, in some ways a little differently, but we can take advantage of everybody's insights and brains if we're smart. And you can see the countries that hold women back because they don't develop as well as countries. Merta says, this is why society attributes to being feminine, not a woman. Okay, I'm not quite sure what that point is, but Love Yourself says, can we be all? Can we not have a man and a woman inside us? We do. We all have both masculine and feminine traits within us. So Grenade, society, and culture attribute it because of biological implications. Well, and for political reasons and so on. And we need to get away from that. We have to start, first of all, we have to stop equating just because there's a set of opposites that we have to put all these opposites in one barrel and all these opposites in another. Okay, for example, Cain and Abel, good and evil. Okay, why do we have to say that one is good and one is evil? They're not. There are good men and there are evil men. There are good women and there are evil women. And so to put all women in a basket where all the negative things are, that's just a way of keeping women down and keeping power. But it's not healthy for the human species. See, Sean says, Granada has a good heart. I know that from many experiences in live streams. Meritus, to me, it was love yourself, thank you. And yes, obviously loving yourself and accepting yourself for who you are is extremely important. And once you can appreciate who you are, then you can find your appropriate spot in society so that you can make your contribution. And so, we transform throughout life. So in the early part of life, you're learning how to be a human being, and that includes all education. Okay, you're learning the ropes. But once you leave education, then you have to go live your life. So basically, going to education is all about logos. It's all about words. But then you have to go out and have experience and see how those rules that you learned back then are going to actually apply in your life. Because as Dr. Jung correctly pointed out, very often we have a conflict of duties, and then we have to select between one or the other. And so that's where the moral decision comes in. And so Isa Love says, I know women who aren't caring or nurturing at all, and surely, and there are men that aren't also. Sagal, I think we do have both, but we tend to gravitate toward one or the other, and society points us in one way or the other. And, we're not going to change that overnight, so we have to learn how to work in the system that we have. Or not, it's not an end-all, be-all. Okay. Love yourself. Mirtas, thank you. I don't. Sean says Grenade has a good heart. Okay. And Agatha Fry says BTS is a Trojan horse for Jungian psychology. I definitely agree with that, Agatha. That's very appropriate. And boy, I'm right in there, the belly of that horse with them. Nira says, what do you think of soul? Does it have a gender? Well, I mean, it doesn't particularly have a gender. I mean, Dr. Stein in this book basically equates soul and spirit, and equates them to both anima and animus. I think it depends. And, if you take it from Dr. Stein's description, then you'd have to say that the soul is this animus feature that's in your psyche, and that it doesn't have a gender per se. I mean, we all have to search for our soul, and so the Red Book, Dr. Jung's Red Book, begins with him calling to his soul, to his deep unconscious, and he literally says, my soul, where have you gone, or something to that effect. Grenade, I think the soul is the opposite gender. I'm not sure. I think that that's sort of what was being said. And Meritus, Skip, love yourself, and I were referring to what Grenade was saying. Okay. In Michelle, in English subtitles are accompanied, I can understand more because I am from Korea. Okay, well, can I turn on English subtitles? I'll make sure that English subtitles closed captioning is turned on all these recent videos. I'm sorry I haven't been careful about that, but I will make sure it gets turned on. Michelle, I apologize for that. Love yourself. You really think there are evil and good people? I think we all are evil and good, but some of us give it more to our evil and some not. I surely do think that there are evil people. And, this is a long conversation. It's very heavily covered in Dr. Jung's book, Ion, Researches into the Phenomenology of the Self. But what Dr. Jung was very concerned about was the fact that Christianity is one-sided, and it only wants to see the good, and it doesn't want to address the bad. It's, they say, oh, just don't think about that. And, the problem is that it doesn't work that way. And the result is that when you force things out of the system, they're going to come back and bite you. And so unfortunately, we have to look at these things from a big picture point of view in terms of where are we all going. In a collective unconscious point of view, everything that you can see, look around, and everything that you see is the result of something that's good, because if it was bad, it would have been forced out of the system. And so, I mean, even something like these little tabs that I use to mark my papers, you know, that came from a good idea, not an evil idea. So everything that we keep in our civilization is a good thing. But it doesn't mean that there aren't people who are not trying to tear it down. And many people have done. And we can see that in today's society very, very blatantly, where there have been people trying to tear down what's been built up for centuries. And so I call that evil personally. You know, I know where they're coming from. Okay, I can put myself in their positions in my imagination, so I understand where it's coming from. You know, the idea that, you know, the end justifies the means doesn't cut it for me. Okay. So anyway, I won't go into more detail. What do I think is the purpose of soul? Whew. The purpose of soul is to animate us, because Dr. Stein and Dr. Jung were mainly referring to the Anima as soul. And in one way, I mean, Dr. Jung defined it 4 different ways, but, and I have read that part of his book into this playlist for BTS, but the purpose is to animate life. I mean, to get us going one way or another. And so you create a family, you create a household, you create a meal, or you create the income necessary to build your family. All of those are very soulful activities. And so the soul is to get you going, I guess is what I would say. Love yourself. Evil people are just people who didn't get enough love and attention as children. You know, that's not true. Okay, you think that Adolf Hitler just didn't get enough loving as a child? I think you haven't read the biography of Adolf Hitler by John Toland, but and the same with Stalin. It's not that they didn't get enough love and attention. It's that they took a wrong course and then built on that. And so if we recognize how people go on a wrong course, then we can correct for it. But we haven't done that yet, because the first step of solving any problem is to understand you have one. And what Dr. Jung pointed out about Christianity specifically is that it ignores evil. And it says things like that, you know, it's just they didn't get enough loving as a child. And so that's ignoring the bad side. And, you know, that isn't the way it works. And so anyway, that's my opinion. I'm sorry if you don't agree with me, but that's my story and I'm sticking with it. Nira. So the soul does not have any attributes either. Then why do we judge each other? It's because we have not realized we are the soul and not the body, mind, or intellect. This is my take. Okay, well, this is a long discussion here. I'm going to avoid it since we've been going for 2 hours and 34 minutes, and it's going to take a while to crunch this. Let me think about that one overnight. I mean, these things are very complex, and they're built up over millennia. And so there is a collective unconscious that we're born into. There's a society that we're born into. There's a collective unconscious that influences what we do and so on. So these things aren't all related to individuals per se. And so to the extent that it doesn't apply to an individual body, mind, or intellect, yes, I agree with you. There is a soul that's is part of the collective unconscious. Valentina says, sorry, I don't read Spanish quickly, so I'm going to pass on that one. Maki says, I think what is called evil is what we can all be capable of depending on circumstances facing us. I agree with that. And so, the first step in individuation process, which is a process that Jung teaches about, is to recognize the evil in our own soul. Okay. And so the first thing that you come up against when you start looking at your depth unconscious is manifest evil. And so it's not some people that are evil. Everyone has evil within them. Skip the Spanish. And Patty Shea. And so thank you, Patty, for that greeting from Ireland. I have a son-in-law who's Irish, and I have 2 grandchildren who are Irish American as a result. And okay, so Love Yourself said, is the evil inside us what Jung called the shadow? And that's the answer to that is no. And the evil inside us is a part of the shadow, but it's not all of the shadow. And that's where we have to learn to differentiate. And so because also in the shadow would be any inferior trait. For example, in the Myers-Briggs, if you're a very thinking, logical person, then your feeling function would be in the shadow, and you may not notice it very much. For example, I'm a very thinking person, and so it's not typical for me to go into an art museum and burst into tears by a painting I see. But that did happen to me with the Jackson Pollock painting. And there's actually a video on that topic on this website, or on this YouTube channel. So that's my inferior function, the feeling function, which it doesn't come through to me in my conscious life very much. So it's part of my shadow, but it's not evil. It's just, that's how I react to things in terms of my personality. And so that's part of shadow also. But evil is there also. Okay, Nira, can you please maybe write to me either on Twitter or email? My email is skip.conover@gmail.com, or @skip_Conover is my Twitter handle. And let's see if we can carry the conversation a little bit further and see how we could have a more useful discussion, including the possibility of an interview to discuss it. So love yourself. Shadow is everything we don't want to admit and show to the world. Well, it's not. It's not only that, but yes, largely that's what is there. But it also includes unconscious things. So it's things that you're not thinking about. Nira says, I think BTS wants to put across the message that love each other without judging anyone on a body level. Their message is don't be shallow. And, that's fair enough. I think that, they are presenting a persona as a group, which is I would at least say androgynous. And I've had friends say it's beyond androgynous. And, so they're a compensation for our hyper masculinity that's been pushed in our society for 25 years, where we have all these movies about fighting off creatures with bigger and bigger guns and bigger explosions and that sort of thing. And the hero is the guy who's, that's not the way we are as human beings in everyday life. And, even movies about the U.S. Marine Corps are not on. They're just way over hyper masculinized in a way that Marines typically are not. Curtis says our environment, society, external aspects have a lot of weight on what goes to the shadow. Yes. Maki, Valentine. Okay, I'm sorry. Again, that's Spanish, so I'm going to leave those. Kislev, I think some people here our first language is not English, so the message is going far, and we will take it more far. Great. I hope you will. And my voice is finished, and so I'm going to discontinue this live stream for today. And and we'll try again tomorrow. And, in the meantime, thank you for joining me today. I very much appreciate it. And I will try to be responsive. I'll go back up through this discussion and see if I can recall exactly what the point was. And but do write to me separately, please. And John, thank you for being here. And some of my regular followers, I really appreciate you being here and helping with the moderation. And Love Yourself says, I guess this is a lyric from Microcosmos, which is, we are equally beautiful as the universe. Yes, and we all have a universe within us. And Mertz says, thank you for sharing your knowledge with us and for your patience. Thank you for your patience, too. Absolutely. So anyway, this video will be available in a few minutes after YouTube crunches it, but it's going to take longer and longer because it's nearly 3 hours long now. So I appreciate, and so peace to everyone. I'm going to discontinue at this point. Have a wonderful Friday, and a wonderful Good Friday for Christians to recognize the life of Christ. So peace be with you.